webinar and all, start again. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar and all others that are in this web series is brought to you from the following organizations: the Rett Syndrome Society of British Columbia, Rett Syndrome Society of Alberta, Manitoba Rett Syndrome Association, Saskatchewan Rett Syndrome Association, and the Ontario Rett Syndrome Association. Today we have Charles Popperman from Tobii Dynavox joining us. Charles works as a solutions consultant for the Canadian division with Tobii Dynavox North America. In his role, he covers a wide range of AAC-related interests for Tobii Dynavox from coast to coast across Canada and the United States. This includes presenting at public and private trainings, supporting AAC users and their teams, and working directly with the provincial and federal funding sources for our clinical partners in Canada. By background, Charles is a certified speech language pathologist with clinical experience working in AAC across the lifespan. And with that, I will hand it over to Charles.
Thank you so much, Christina. And also thank you to the Canadian Rett Syndrome Association Communication web series for being able to host Tobii Dynavox today. I'm very happy that everybody's here. Hopefully you're able to grab these QR codes off this initial slide. There are just some dedicated resources. We'll be also providing a little bit of an overview at the end of the presentation as well. I wanted to let everybody know that this is a recorded session and it will be made available so that you're able to view it afterwards, but just so that everybody's clear on that as well. So today we're going to be covering advanced access with eye gaze. So what my hope for you all today is that you're able to walk out of here, if you already have a basic understanding of eye tracking and eye gaze access in general, you're able to come out of here with a much more wholesome view of what it is the eye gaze experience is, especially specifically tailored to Rett syndrome, as well as just progressive and acquired diagnoses. Eye gaze is sort of an abstract concept, especially from somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience from it. But I find it from the different trainings that I've been able to provide throughout my career that if eye gaze is put into a more practical light, it can be a lot more easily understood. And it is actually not as difficult as a concept to understand as you might think it is. So as far as the intended audience, this presentation is tailored for users as well as families and support staff. Although we will be covering some advanced features of eye gaze access, my hope is that we'll build upon sort of that basic understanding and get you all to a place where you have a more wholesome view of eye gaze. So there is some prior knowledge that was expected of this, but as long as you have sort of the understanding of what access methods are and how they work with computers, I think that you all will do just fine. So today we're going to be covering desktop accessibility, accessible applications, some environmental controls, and available supports from Tobii Dynavox. So a little bit of an overview of today's session. So just starting with an introduction, sort of a Tobii Dynavox. Christina kind of did a little bit of an overview of myself as I work for Tobii Dynavox, specifically within the Canadian division. And then we'll be getting into reviewing eye gaze access, as well as desktop accessibility, and then going on through the presentation. I'm hoping to keep you folks for right about an hour. I'm hoping not to go over it too much, but we will have some time for questions at the very end. So I want to start by saying a brief thank you. Tobii Dynavox and so many other organizations in the assistive technology community, we've undertaken some really quite extensive investments in trying to provide different formats of training, and that includes different webinar series and also participating with our partners across North America and the world. Definitely the Rett Syndrome Association within Canada, definitely being one of those, in that we're wanting to participate in sort of getting our training materials out in any kind of digital format we can. At Tobii Dynavox, our mission is to empower people with disabilities to do what they once did or never thought possible. And that's a motto that every single employee in our organization really takes to heart. And that fuels us in all of our interactions, our demeanor, as well as our work ethic when we're working with users and their families. So just a little bit of background about Tobii Dynavox. If you're new to it, if you're not new to it, I think it's still helpful. Tobii Dynavox is a world leader and supplier with assistive technology for communication. Today, we have offices in I think about 11 or 12 different countries, and we have about 500 employees around the world, and we work with different partners across different industries. So not only within the assistive technology industry, but we work with consumer research. Our eye tracking is within automotive applications, gaming, scientific research. So what we do is we take a lot of the research that we gather specific to eye tracking, and we integrate that to improve experiences across different what they're called as OEM integrations. So when eye tracking is put onto some sort of a user interface, definitely one of them would absolutely be our eye tracking that is done within our assistive technology devices. So what's really great is we can take all of this research from all these different facets, and we can improve upon them to also improve the experience of somebody that has a disability and their eye tracking experiences. So just a little bit of background there. So I already went over sort of our mission statement to empower people with disabilities to do what they once did or never thought possible. And truly allowing users to be able to find success in their interactions, find success with their connectivity with the world is something that really, really fuels us, and we're impassioned by it. We take great pride in being both a manufacturer as well as one of the largest advocates for our users. So kind of getting a little bit to the basics here. As an overview, we all understand, within this web series presentation, we all understand the importance of human connection. Okay. It's how we share thoughts. It's how we share dreams, hopes, emotions, worries, empathy, compassion. So connection is an integral link to, what it really means to kind of be human. So capturing that significance, communication is actually what is part of that connection, what connects everything around us in our lives. So having the control and choice over what we do, sharing our thoughts and needs, learning and growing, and of course, maintaining close relationships with those around us is crucial for our social and emotional well-being. If we think about for kiddos, kiddos learn, there's a lot of research into, especially within speech pathology, into social interaction. Our profession is kind of rooted in psychology and developmental language and developmental milestones. And kiddos need to be able to engage in their environment and socially interact. And the hard part is, especially for kiddos that are using AAC, is we want to try and implement AAC and allow it to sort of remove a lot of those barriers around communication. So just because we may have a user that may not be able to verbally communicate, or they may not be able to move in a way that a typical child would, we can then supplement it and try and remove barriers by using assistive technology so that they're able to get that social interaction as well, because it's a very critical piece with development. So I want to show some very familiar faces within the Tobii Dynavox community. So I want you all to meet a couple members of our family here at Tobii Dynavox who use our technology. This is Ava. She's a funny, rambunctious girl with Rett syndrome, and she can't speak or control her muscle movements, so she uses her eyes to be able to access a symbol-based communication software called TD Snap. And this is Jeff. Jeff, as you can see, he's active, he's outgoing. Here he's at a gym, and he's actually very, very avid within the, very, very active within the community. Jeff has ALS, and so he's dependent on his eyes to be able to interact with the world around him. And he creates messages within a keyboard within something called Communicator 5 software, which we'll just chat briefly about today. So why does I hesitate to say why access matters, because of course it matters a whole lot. No matter how advanced or powerful a product is, it's no good if somebody can't use it. I know that I'm delving a little bit into the basics here, but I think it's good for some foundational review and knowledge. So we think about how easy it is to communicate in general for typical communicators. At Tobii Dynavox, we are able to see the need for providing inclusive access for all across the life spectrum, because it's so important whether or not someone is developing in their language and developing in their communication, or somebody who has lived quite quite a long life, has acquired a lot of different relationships, and we need to be able to provide access methods for them to be able to gain access to communication supports as well as for other supports just for life. Just a couple definitions here. I think it's helpful. It's just as a part of the review. So, as far as access is defined as the freedom or ability to use something, whereas access method is the way or means of providing that access. So, for AAC users, this means providing the means to control communication device. Okay, so that's sort of it for as far as the introduction goes. A little bit drawn out there, but I want to be able to jump in now and review some and kind of delve into eye gaze access. So eye tracking explained here. So eye tracking, and this isn't just specific to Tobii Dynavox, breaking down the actual conceptualization of eye tracking, it allows the user to control the communication software or any sort of communication or application interface on a computer using only their eyes. So selections can be made by letting gaze dwell on an object for a set period of time. Eye tracking can also be used in conjunction with like a switch to make a selection. So there's a couple of different ways. We can use basically the eyes as a pointer, and we can dwell at an object for a set period of time, and that's going to allow us to select it. Or we can use an additional accessory. It could be a switch. And when I say switch, a switch can be a keyboard command. It's any selectable target, anything that's selectable that can help us to be able to select a target on a screen. So we might point with our eyes, but we select with something else. Okay. So eye tracking is an excellent option for someone who has difficulty with the movement and coordination of voluntary muscles. Okay. So Rett syndrome, for instance, in which a person can't control or coordinate those movements, this is, very likely an option that provides a lot of success. It's important to note too that even users that have cortical visual impairments don't necessarily rule out eye tracking. And there's actually a lot of documented research that goes into a high rate of success, even with cortical visual impairments with eye tracking. So, determining success with assessment. I think that from a clinical perspective, it's helpful to share what AAC professionals, especially if you're coming from us and you have a kiddo that has Rett syndrome, if you have a family member that has Rett syndrome, it's good to know that it's good to have a perspective of what AAC professionals are looking for when they're determining success with eye tracking. A lot of times, I'm not so sure it's so well defined what it is that clinicians are looking at when they're doing an eye gaze assessment. And I just try to provide a little bit of the background there. So many times there are various exercises for getting the user to track with their eyes by having the person point to various items in the room around the person, or we might have them follow an object. It could be an object around a set piece of paper or around a set screen. For young kiddos, we often want to find something that's quite motivating. I share a little bit of a story, but if we know a kiddo is really into Spider-Man, for example, or if they have a really good response, a lot of times for younger users, they might have a really good response to lighting. So if we have, like we've used glow sticks before, right? So you could have something that captures attention for the user. And what the clinician is trying to do is they're trying to gauge the ability of the user to track that object in space around them. And that helps to inform them whether or not they would be a good candidate for using like an eye tracking device or maybe setting up an eye tracking trial, because the clinician is looking for that eye movement. Are they able to move from left to right, up and down? Are they able to follow a target across space? Is there any jitter or difficulties or spasmodic movement with the eyes? Also, they might be looking for tone changes. So if it's really causing a lot of difficulty for the user when they're having to look at a target and follow the target, and they're really trying to move their head, maybe it just has to do with their positioning, their seating position. So there's different things that we're looking at from a clinical perspective when we're assessing for eye gaze. But a primary thing is that trackability. Are they able to track a target in space in front of them? And sometimes for kiddos, you have to just get a little bit inventive, and you have to find something that is quite motivating. So that's just something, even if there's an upcoming eye gaze trial or an upcoming eye gaze assessment, or if this is something that's sort of new to you in general, having something that's quite motivating can really, really help seal the deal as far as having success with that initial assessment. So that's just a little bit of background as far as the determining success with the assessment of eye tracking. So I want to dive a little bit deeper, just talking about eye tracking within different applications. And I know we want to talk about some desktop accessibility, and I think that that'll really provide a really good in-depth overview of how eye tracking is able to operate, a whole computer and be able to execute different tasks with that, which is so very, very important even beyond school. So of all the available access methods, eye tracking is the most technologically advanced and can sometimes be daunting as far as the self-learning experience. So when learning it to support a child or a family member, we want to be able to have a good understanding of how eye tracking is being able to be used with the device. Eye tracking is essentially it's almost like a computer mouse. We're interacting with our eyes in space, and the device is picking up our eyes and is able to use algorithms to calibrate where our eyes are looking on the screen. So I'm going to show a little bit of a video representation here because I think it'll be a lot more helpful. So Tobii's eye tracking research, I've already talked about how it goes into different segments: consumer research, sports science, automotive. So our eye tracking is actually comprised of what are called near infrared diodes. Okay, they're little emitters, and I'm trying to put my mouse here on the screen. Hopefully you're able to see that. They're little emitters that are on within our eye gaze bar. And so what happens is those near infrared emitters send out an infrared signal that's then reflected off of the back of our eye, and then we have cameras that pick up pictures of the eye and its movements. Okay, and this is done about every millisecond. Okay, so those reflections are picked up by the eye tracker's cameras to collect high-speed images, and the eye tracker determines where we're looking through what's called filtering and calculations. So our software then takes that data and scatters it across space to create a 3D representation of our focus with the screen. So this initial setup, when we hear the fancy word calibration, that's actually what's being done. Okay. It took me about 10 years for somebody to actually explain this to me. Okay. So I think it's helpful to understand what actually goes into a calibration with near infrared eye tracking, which near infrared is sort of the industry standard. If it isn't a Tobii Dynavox eye tracker, you can about bet that the eye tracking that's used even with our competitors is usually some form of infrared light. Okay, so it creates that 3D representation, and it's just really, really important because even with an uncontrolled head movement, or in lots of different varied positions, even including with outdoor TD with our eye tracking. It's a functionality of our eye tracking, which it can be used outdoors. It can be used in bright sunlight. Our eye tracking can be used through glasses and even progressive lenses. And it can be used with one or a conjunction of one or the left or the right eye or both. So it serves a variety of diagnoses and conditions, such as cerebral palsy or Rett syndrome, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injuries, and progressive diagnosis like ALS and Parkinson's. So it's just important to note that after we have that initial calibration, it creates that 3D model that's specific to the user. And that's very, very important to understand that even if we have some movement of the head, or if we're going to be using the device in different positions, you're still going to have a high rate of success with that. So that just sort of covered our review of eye gaze. Now what I'd like to go into is something called TD control. What I'll be showing you in this next section is going into programs called TD control, Communicator 5, and TD snap. We'll be starting with TD control, which is more of that desktop accessibility. So let's break down the different kinds of programs that are used within AAC. So we have desktop accessibility or computer access programs, and we have communication page sets. And if you're taking any notes, that's an important distinction to make, because it doesn't matter what AAC company that you work with. Each company has programs that help with computer access using the actual system and with communication page sets, which are often embedded on that computer access program or are used in conjunction with that program. So one program focuses on using the actual computer and device, as well as connectivity with the world around us. That could be environmental controls, could be smart home accessories, which we'll talk about a little bit. It could be, we have users that operate doors and locks, turn on faucets. So we would be using a computer access program for that. And then with communication page sets, the name is in the description. So those are the programs that we use to actually communicate, which is really, really big for, our nonverbal users that are using the device's speakers to be able to speak through it from a page set. So right now we're going to be talking about desktop accessibility, which is that computer access component with Tobii Dynavox. So what is TD Control? TD Control is a software application which will allow a user to be able to navigate the computer and basically with full mouse functions. So the reason this is actually about the fourth iteration of our desktop access programs. So if there's any folks in here that have been using Tobii Dynavox or have knowledge of Tobii Dynavox, they probably remember a software called Gaze Interaction. Or they might remember a software called Windows Control. So TD Control is like the third or fourth adaptation of that. And it was built over probably about 4 or 5 years worth of R&D research with these primary focuses. We wanted to increase the speed, increase the accuracy, reduce the level of fatigue and anxiety, as well as reduce the number of failures that users have when they're out in the desktop operating a computer. Why is this all very important? This is something that I think that we don't really share enough about, but it's something that I'm quite impassioned about, and there's lots of my colleagues here within Tobii Dynavox, as well as within our product team, that are impassioned by it. We talk about creating a success within school, and we want to provide supports, helpful supports to students and students that are using AAC to go throughout school and to be able to participate in curriculum as well as socialize with their peers. I think that one of the primary challenges is what actually happens beyond school. When kiddos age out, sometimes the devices or the supports were actually purchased by the school, and then therefore sometimes they are pulled back. There's an opportunity to purchase equipment from the school, and sometimes financially that's not a viable option, or the actual amount of professional assistance that's available after school or post graduation can be quite challenging to be able to find. And that's something that we're working very, very hard and advocating to change at Tobii Dynavox, because if we think about as human beings are we want to be able to have purpose, and that's why we go out, we have jobs, we live our lives, and we find it is that what we're good at, and what impassions us, and we want to be able to provide that same thing for our users as well. And so it's very, very important that we start to have discussion and we start to build upon how is it that a user that's using eye tracking is going to be able to access everything else that's available to us that doesn't have to use assistive technology. So integrations with smart home accessories, integrations with different kinds of computer applications used for work and for whatever else. So that's really what we're trying to build upon here. Talking about TD Control specifically, something that's different about TD Control and what's particularly exciting is the fact that it uses what's called machine learning to make selections more accurate. So through an artificial neural network, Control is able to learn icons, links, and buttons. So actually, the more that a user utilizes TD Control, the program actually learns what it is that the user's looking at. And as far as security goes, Tobii Dynavox, as well as Tobii, has really taken a very firm stance on ensuring that all data that is even collected here, it actually is owned by the user themselves. None of this is actually collected or utilized by us as a company. So I think that this feature, though, is very, very important, because to be able to take advantage of the extra help that's used with target adjustment is very, very important. And this is kind of getting to more of that advanced access with eye tracking. So we want to be able to start to allow a user to have a very more fluid experience on the desktop. And one of the ways we can do that is we can use machine learning to basically, if a user gets really close to a target, the program's able to pick up, okay, well, what's the closest linkable item on a web page, on a specific program, and it will automatically move the mouse almost magnetically towards that target. And I'll show you how that kind of works within the program. And feel free, if you've got questions along the way, Christina, feel free to cut me off if there's something that really pertains to it that we need to answer, okay? Now, if we think about even how complicated mouse actions can be on a desktop, we have to think about, it's really important to consider that we need to be able to simulate or recreate those mouse movements within our software that's adapting what a mouse can do. One of the things, and something I'm showcasing here, is the ability to actually pan the camera. You know, that's something, it is 2022, and to be able to pan a camera within a game or within a program with eye tracking, non-existent. Was not something that you could do. And that's something that it's important. We need to think about all the things that we do with a mouse as typical users interacting with Windows in this case. So now with TD Control, you're actually able to pan a camera. Even so, if you're playing a video game, or really any game or program that allows you to pan the camera, is something that you're going to be able to do with a user going to be able to do with TD Control. So you know, it's great. There's a variety of different games that are out there here. I believe I'm showing StarCraft 2, but a lot of times kiddos we need to be able to provide them with the ability to have fun, right? So we want eye tracking to be a fun experience. A lot of times, sometimes clinicians can kind of make this mistake of distinctions between, okay, we're going to communicate now, and then we're going to have fun. I don't know if you all have ever heard this before, but in a treatment session, I hear it. We've heard it, or at least I've heard it all the time, that, okay, well, we're going to do our work here, and then we're going to have fun. Well, the communication is supposed to be fun. So we want to create an environment that is fun, that gets us to be able to communicate. And so we want to have programs and supports that are available that are engaging to users, and then we can talk about it. Okay, so at this point, I want to be able to jump out to my desktop and kind of showcase this to you. I think it's the best way to be able to learn a program, is to be able to see it in action. So I'm going to end my slideshow for a moment. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm just going to share a different screen. I'm going to jump over to my main screen here. Okay, so you should be seeing my mouse as well as my desktop. Let me know, Christina, if you aren't seeing it. If you are, that's perfectly fine. And I'm going to start up TD Control. So it's important to note that with TD Control, everything that I'm going to show you right now, I'm going to actually do with my eyes alone. Okay, so I'm not going to be using my computer mouse, and just kind of show you, walk through this program. What's important about this is, although TD Control was initially launched with that more advanced literate user in mind, I'm going to show you something in this that's actually built to work with more of that response to stimuli cause effect, more of that pediatric level of user when they're initially using eye gaze access. And we may need to use sort of response to stimuli programs like a Look to Learn or a Look to Read, or even like a Magic IFX, a program that's going to basically result in the users looking at a screen and they're seeing something happen. Okay, it's really, really important when we're trying to get initial buy-in, because eye tracking is so gosh darn abstract for kiddos. It's like, okay, well, I look at all sorts of stuff and nothing really happens. But when I look at the screen, does all of a sudden, do I see this very colorful dot move around on it? Do I hear a jingle, or one of the programs we've used before is actually, it looks like bubble wrap across the screen. And my gosh, how enticing is snapping bubble wrap for kiddos with their eyes. So we want to create that cause effect. I look at the screen, I get something in a response to that. Okay. So that is built into this program as well. I'm going to start out by just a basic overview, and then I'll show like operating a web browser and some different mouse controls. So the screen that you all are looking at right now is something called the Quick Start Guide. An important thing is that throughout this whole program, TD Control, the user has the ability to look at menus without them being eye gaze accessible. And that's really, really important. So I can freely look at quick calibrate, and I can look at this copy, cut, and paste and notepad and settings. And I'm looking at them, but I'm not selecting any of them. The only gazeable button here is this hide menu here to the right-hand side that you can see me activating. Okay. So at any point in the program, I can always end up hitting this information button that you'll see. And I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not actually sure what this does, which is obviously a little bit more important for that advanced user, but it's just an important thing that we want to build in learning throughout the program. So the first thing that I'm going to do is what I would do is the initial setup process. So within TD Control, something that is very familiar with everybody is that gaze interaction menu where you can see my eyeballs moving around there on the top right-hand side. Okay, this is going to be the same thing that if you all have used Tobii Dynavox eye tracking before, this is a very familiar looking menu. So you'll see that arrow moving up and down is my distance meter. If I get closer to the device, you'll see that arrow go up. If I get further away, you'll probably hear my voice start to trail off, and I'm getting away from the eye tracker. And you can see I've got a lot of space to play here. You can't see my video at the moment, but I'm actually moving around quite a lot. If I stopped sharing my screen, perhaps you might have a better view at that. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment, and then I'm just going to spotlight my video so that you all are able to see me. So as far as play across the screen, I'm going like this as far as my chair goes. So as far as tracking goes, it's going to give me this basically a 3-foot by 3-foot box that it's going to continue to track my eyes in. After I do that initial calibration, we talked about how regardless if we have uncontrollable head movements, regardless if we're going to be seated in different positions, if I'm at more of a recline, it's still going to be able to pick up my eyes. I just want to have a very successful initial calibration. And while I'm actually out here on this menu, I think it's a good idea to just do a short review of eye tracking as far as positioning goes. What you all will see if you have experience with a user with eye tracking, regardless if they're an advanced user that's using a lot of advanced features on eye tracking, anytime that we'll have somebody that calls into our support or is having trouble with eye tracking, the absolute number one, see if we can get the chats going here. What is the absolute number one reason why eye tracking is unsuccessful? So see if you can write your response in the chat. The number one reason for why eye tracking is unsuccessful for a user. I'll give you folks about a minute there. Okay, Christina, how are we doing as far as responses go? Do we have a couple?
Yeah, actually pretty consensus. Everybody says bad calibration. Okay.
All right, so bad calibration. Surprisingly, that's not the number one reason for why eye tracking is not successful. The number one cause, and this is actually the case regardless of even some of the most seasoned clinicians, is positioning. Positioning is the number one reason for why eye tracking is unsuccessful. So even after you have a successful calibration, or even after you have an okay kind of calibration, position is the number one reason for why eye tracking is not successful. I mean, and we have to really consider this with our users, that as someone is using, human beings are not static. we're dynamic, we're always moving around. Okay, so regardless if we have some spasticity or if we have some spasmodic movement, or if we have some tone changes. So, as the day goes on, maybe a user in the morning when we do an initial calibration or when we do the initial setup, they look really good. They're nice and upright. But as the day goes on, maybe they start to slouch to the side here and their tone starts to change, and we might have to move their chair and their position so that they're able to have more of that core support. Well, as that changes, oftentimes what I will see is we'll do an initial setup with eye tracking. I've got a device here. I'll do an initial setup with eye tracking. That user looks really good. And then when I was working clinically, I'd come back at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and the user's like this. Okay. So it doesn't matter how good the calibration was because the doggone device isn't out in front of them for them to be able to access it. And that sounds like such a simple thing, but it's so important. And it's something that is, I don't think it's actually chatted about and talked about enough, is that position, because we're dynamic and we have to ensure that the device is always in a position that will enable the user to be successful with it. So when we talk about setting up a user for success, it's setting up a user for success over time. It's not just we initially do this setup and we see how the user, the kiddo, whoever's using the device is. It's okay. Well, I've seen them at 8 a.m. when, working clinically, when I was doing eye gaze assessment, I'll see them at 8 a.m. Then I'm going to see them the next time. I'm going to try and see them after lunch, or I might see them, at 3 or 4 p.m. And a person, a client or a patient that I'm working with that has a degenerative disease or that has some difficulty with muscle tone is going to look like a completely different person at a different time of the day. So we have to ensure that this device, relative to their position over time, is successful. So that's why when we talk about eye gaze, I always push mounting, that we have to have a good understanding of the mounting equipment, because the mounting equipment is critical. It enables the device to be in a position where the user can access it, because without access, you can't use eye tracking. So it's something that I think is worth review. It doesn't matter how advanced of a clinician you are, or someone that has a lot of experience. It's something that I don't think is considered enough. And even when we're training teams, like training support teams at school, or for training support teams in a facility, we need to ensure that it's not just, we're not just setting Susie up right now, we're setting Susie up throughout her entire day, because Susie is a dynamic person and her position changes throughout the day. So we need to ensure that her mount and her positioning relative to her device stays accurate. Also, on that point of positioning, when we're talking about eye tracking specifically, we talk about planes of parallel, or parallel planes, excuse me. What that means is that our eye tracking screen should always be in parallel to a user's face. And this isn't necessarily well described even in clinical training. And the reason for that is eye gaze diodes set up on the bottom of the device are set up at an angle, okay? And the reason for that is, even with an eye gaze device, which I don't have in front of me, so forgive me for that. Even with an eye gaze device, those diodes are set up at an angle, which you'll see even on an I-series. An I-series isn't just flat like this. It actually comes out at an angle about like this. And it's so those diodes can be angled up towards the user's eyes. And so it can be reflected back at the screen and then picked up by our cameras. So what we want is the screen's face to be in parallel to the user's face. A lot of times what I'll see a user like this, but their screen is perfectly upright. Well, we don't want that. And the main reason why we don't want that is because if you all are able to see my eyes right now, if you consider what it is that we're tracking the pupils, and we're tracking the actual iris moving around in space, okay? And we're taking high-speed pictures of that. Well, it's much more difficult to take pictures of a user's eyes when you reduce the real estate of the eye. And this is what happens when we have a screen that's below us. So I've got kind of droopy eyelids anyways, but if I move my hands down and I'm following as if it's a screen, well, my eyeballs have completely gone away. You can't even see them anymore. But if I start raising the screen up towards midline, my eyes are much more open. And actually, if we bring that screen up just a little bit more, look how open my eyes are now. Now this is as if the bottom of the screen was lined up right with where my eyes are. and how open they are for eye tracking and for all of those high-speed images that we're taking. So when we're setting up a user for success, and let's say they're in a reclined position, okay? If they're in a reclined position like this, we don't want the screen here. We want the screen here because it's relative to the face, okay? We want that to be parallel, regardless of where the face is. If they're shifted to the side, the screen needs to be to the side. So that's just, it's something that I think it should be reviewed. And hopefully that's some helpful information, at least on practicality with positioning and mounting with eye tracking. Okay, so I'm going to get back out into I'm going to share my desktop again. So you all should be seeing my desktop screen again. So I'm back into TD control here, and you'll see that there's this bubble that's moving around the screen here. Now, when I went into eye gaze settings here, we looked at calibration, and we looked at that calibration window on that top right-hand side. And the reason why that's so important is that actually helps you determine that positioning, okay? If I start to, let's say I start to, I have the device down below me, okay? You'll see how much further my eyes are up on this box by having the device. I'm now looking, my midline of my eyes are lined up with the top of the screen. Likewise, if I bring my eyes all the way down, okay? However, I angle myself up so that I'm parallel with my screen, I still remain in the middle of that track box because that eye tracker is angled up. It's already sitting on the bottom of the screen. So it's actually even more helpful at times to have the user just slightly below the midline of the screen. Sometimes I even aim for the very base of the screen. We want lined up directly with the user's eyes and then angled down towards them, okay? So after we talked about this initial calibration, I'm going to jump back out in the desktop and kind of show you how this works. So you all are probably familiar. I'm moving my mouse around here. With desktop accessibility with Tobii Dynavox and really with the majority of programs out there, you may remember it's like an eye gaze bar that goes along the right-hand side of the screen, and it has different mouse selections. Okay. If you're familiar with any of our eye tracking previous to this presentation, then you're familiar with this eye gaze bar. And that was either something called Tobii Gaze Interaction Software or Windows Control 2, because both of those used that eye gaze action bar where you had different actions. You could select a double click, a single click, a safe click, and different sort of actions here. Now, what TD control is now you see this circular bubble that's moving around the screen, and it's based on a concept called interaction first. And what that means is, stop sharing for a second. What interaction first means is all human beings, when we're using objects around us, we're visual communicators. We communicate with our environment visually, unless we have some sort of vision impairment. And then we might have to use something that's going to aid us as like a sensory stick, or we might also use caregivers as well as other supports within the community. Obviously, there's lots that are available to individuals with visual impairments, but for visual communicators, for folks that are using their vision to help inform them about their environment, what's important to note is human beings will look at something and then determine action, so that we interact with our environment and then we act. So we interact, then we act. That's just how human beings work. So how does this look within our day-to-day, and what's a good example? If you open up your refrigerator and you look for your carton of milk, okay? The first thing that your eyes are going to do is you're going to see your carton of milk there, right? Then the next thing your brain does is it's going to send a command to complete an action. So maybe your action is, okay, I've located my carton of milk. Now I'm going to reach out and ambulate towards the carton of milk, squeeze and grab the carton of milk from the fridge. Or maybe I'll move the carton of milk around. That's another action I can do. Or maybe I'll take the cap off and pour out the carton of milk on the floor. That's another action I can take. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to interact, then I'm going to act. So what we tried to do with this latest interaction of eye tracking with TD control is take that concept and apply it to a computer. Because if you remember, I'm going to share my screen again here. With that eye gaze bar of actions on the right-hand side, what we were essentially requiring users to do is to select their action and then move that onto what it is that they want to interact with. And that's actually backwards. That's not actually how human beings interact with pretty much anything. We want to look at something and then we want to complete an action upon it. So that's actually what interaction first is, and that's how TD control is built. So if I go ahead and hit play here, and you'll see this interaction bubble move around the screen. Now let's say I look at this wallpaper engine here. I have now, the program goes, okay, Charles, you've now selected wallpaper engine here, this application. What is it that you want to do? I'm going to bring wallpaper engine to the center of the screen, and I'm going to provide you with a circular array of different actions you can now do with that interaction. So that's a quite intuitive concept. Like I'm going to look at something because maybe I don't know what I want to do, but I find something that's interesting. If you think about when you're searching the web, you find a video that you're interested in. Well, I might want to click on it. Well, I look at it, it brings it to the center of my screen, and actually, you know what? I want to do a left click. So I talked about how at every little menu change in TD control, you have the ability to hit that information button, and it sort of helps you out. Like maybe I don't know what these actions are. Super important, I should say, super important for this growing generation of kiddos that are getting into using eye tracking, because I will tell you that less and less kiddos even understand what mouse commands are, because we're into an age of touchscreens where even a mouse, like even the image of a mouse, they're like, what in the world's that? It's kind of crazy for someone that's around my age or older, because, we've used computer mouses, forever. But touchscreens are becoming so widely available and are used so widely for accessing dynamic displays, for accessing computers, that actually the mouse is becoming less and less of an occurrence, especially for kiddos that are accessing technology. So it's important that I might need to describe what a left click does. It's like when I just want to sort of describe that as a concept and something that we're going to probably run into more and more often. But it's just important to, I think, make note of that. So if I hit this information button, because maybe I'm unaware of what these actions do, it will pull up exactly what the descriptions are, and for more of that literate advanced user, and we'll show them, okay, this is where these are the different available actions to you. So from here, I could double left click this to open it. I could single left click it, or maybe I can move it around the screen if I wanted to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you an action called adjust target that you'll see on that bottom left-hand side. And this is a new one. This is something we've never had before, and something I think is pretty critical. So before, what we would have is a user would select their action, and I'm just telling you what this experience would be for a user. So they'd select their action, they move that action over to where they want to interact with. But let's say they get that mouse and they get it right about here. They're trying to select this Tobii Dynavox folder here, and they get that mouse right here. For about the last 12 years, what would have to be done is that user would have to look off, would have to move across the entire screen real estate, come back to their double left click, and then move back across the screen real estate again. Essentially moving across the screen real estate sometimes 4 times, when they have a simple error of just not quite getting the mouse cursor where they want it to be. And that's part of one of those goals of reducing the amount of errors and reducing anxiety, because you can think about how much anxiety that creates when I select my action and I'm just so doggone close to what it is I want to select, but I just continue to miss it. So what we did with adjust target is, now let's say I'm using this interaction bubble on TD control and I just missed it there. Okay. There's no need to go back across the whole screen real estate. We have it within this circular menu. All we have to do is change where our crosshairs are, where our selection is. So I can look at this adjust target and go, actually, I wanted to select that. And you can see just how, I mean, truly, if you're thinking about if our users are manipulating data, or if they're working and they're wanting to move something in a much more accurate way, just how accurate you can actually be with this. I mean, this is so zoomed in, this would only show probably right around 12 cells on Excel. So you can actually individually choose where information would be, and just provides another whole layer of accuracy that's actually it's integral and built into this. What's important and something I want to showcase here is I won't be able to go into all of the available actions, but I think what's helpful is I'm going to pull up the Tobii Dynavox website and just show you scroll, because I think that that's a good example. So if I pull up the Tobii Dynavox website here, and obviously, one of the important things when surfing a web page for a user would be the scroll action and be able to see what other information is available. And you can see that scroll icon's at the very top of that menu. So I can go ahead and hide this guide, hit this scroll function. And now as I look down on the screen, you can see that this yellow bar that's moving around the circle is able to pick up where relative to where my interaction point is. And as I look down the screen, you can see it's going to start scrolling. Now, what's so great about this, specifically for literacy and for reading exercise for even with kiddos, is as they read, I'm just looking at this. Let me scroll down here and see if there's some information that I can actually read here. Let's go to actually a different product page and see. Okay, perfect. So you can see here I have this unlock possibilities, and then I have this iSeries is an eye gaze enabled speech generating device. Okay, so as a user is reading, it actually continues to bring up what they're reading to be in the center of the screen, because it's all very sensitive to how far away you are from the interaction point. So as you continue to read and get further below the interaction point, the screen will automatically start scrolling for you, which is really, really great for users that actually enjoy quite a bit of online reading or browsing, because that there isn't a different action that they have to do. Previously, what they'd have to do is we had a scroll feature, but you'd have to click off of scroll. And then if you wanted to do something, you'd have to go into a different menu, or you'd have to select another action. And that was just really not that intuitive. Whereas now, if, for instance, let's say I wanted to click one of these app or accessory tabs above, I could quickly exit out of here. It immediately gives me that interaction bubble. And there I wanted to go to specifications, but I just missed it there. I can just hit this adjust target, specifications, and I'm going to single left click it. Okay, now I'm there. So you can just sort of see how it is that works. Now I want to show you, while I have some time here, because I really fear that I'm going to run out of time, is I'm going to jump into continuous mode, which is something that's built into TD Control and is actually more built for pediatric users. So in this continuous mode, you will see that all I have available is this tiny dot. And all this dot is a single left click. So continuous mode is more of that mouse emulation kind of a program, or part of the program, in which if you were using like a response to stimuli, which I'm going to open up one here. So if I use a response to stimuli type program, I'm just pulling up eye gaze games. If you're unfamiliar with this website, it's actually built by some folks from the AT industry, some programmers from the AT industry, and there's actually some free things that are available. I think it's a great resource, specifically for like some games that aren't so response to stimuli oriented. So I'm just going to go to start here, and I'm just using my eye gaze access right now. A single left click. And and you can imagine how enticing this would be for a kiddo. I'm flying a spaceship now with just my eyes. Okay, I can look down, I can slow down, I can look up and speed up. But there's quite a bit that you can do with this. But continuous mode is a really great assessment tool for using eye gaze specifically with younger kiddos. Okay. Now I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to jump back to my presentation here. Okay, so we just jumped to TD Control. Are you able to see, Christina? It should say, let's jump to TD Control. I want to make sure that the screen is the one that's being shared.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Oh, okay, perfect. So we just did a review of TD Control. That's that desktop computer access program within Tobii Dynavox. I did want to be able to show and show the accessible apps within Communicator 5. I am, just for the sake of time, I'm going to show you all a short video. And what I'm going to do is I'll probably hit stop share because I think I need to share audio there. But I'm going to share a short video in which it kind of goes over, if you're familiar with Communicator 5, it is a computer access hybrid communication page set program where it has a keyboard and it's more built for literate users, but it has something that's unique, and that is the ability to access different social media and social sites, which is something that's been kind of a pressing issue. That's something we needed to really work on, because especially in today's kind of world, post COVID-19, or even during Omicron or whatever it is that we're going to have next, I think it's important that we want to be able to build applications that are accessible regardless of what access method that a kiddo has available. So eye gaze access, for instance, using eye gaze access within TikTok, or using eye gaze access within Spotify, or within Facebook, within YouTube, within Netflix. So there's lots of different accessible apps that we're working with third-party developers to be able to integrate within Communicator 5. And I'm just going to show you a short little 3-minute clip of what that looks like. And then quickly, I'll do a quick review of environmental controls, and then we'll have some time. We may run over just a little bit here, Christina. Hopefully that's okay. So Communicator 5, I'm going to show you all a short video here. Okay, I want to make sure that you all are able to hear the sound okay here. I will do a quick pause to ensure that you all are getting audio.
Before we start, if you haven't done so, I highly recommend
We have audio.
Okay, excellent.
that you watch our Introducing Communicator 5 Accessible Apps short video for an overview of the accessible apps. To get started with Communicator 5 accessible apps, first, make sure your Tobii Dynavox i13 or i16 has an internet connection. To install the accessible apps, open the Update Notifier on your desktop. After a brief status verification, it will show 2 Join In updates available. Select the Download button. When the updates are downloaded, select the Install button. After the installation is completed, select Done and exit the Update Notifier. After launching Communicator 5, select Edit Homepage, select Add Page Sets, then select Text Communication, and finally select Add-on Products. On this screen, you'll find the accessible apps. Select an app and select Add to Homepage. Repeat this for all the apps you wish to add to your Communicator 5 homepage. Note that most of the apps have their light versions available. The light version provides fewer and larger buttons on each screen for easier access when needed. Also, make sure to add these Join In page sets: Join In Close All and Join In Settings. After you add all the apps you want to use, select X to go to the home page. On the Communicator 5 homepage, use the Join In Settings page set to set up your accessibility preferences. Supported access methods include eye gaze, where you can adjust dwell time and highlight color, eye gaze and switch, and touch, where you can choose whether you want the browser area to be selectable or not. The options you set are active across all accessible apps, but will not affect the other button or selection areas in Communicator 5. Join In Close All allows you to close all of the accessible apps with Windows open on your device. Be sure to check out our videos and quick guides for each individual accessible app.
Okay, thank you all for watching that. I'm going to jump back into a PowerPoint presentation for the moment. Okay, so you all were able to see the accessible apps available within Communicator 5. I just think it's really, really important that we design some social media as well as some popular applications and Netflix and engage accessible versions of that for kiddos as well as for adults that are using eye gaze to access digital interfaces. I want to be as brief as possible, just with the following information. I won't spend as much time in it, but what I'd like to do is I'm just going to very briefly just show the environmental controls that are built in within TD Snap. If you're familiar with a program called Snap Core First, you'll probably notice that it's changed to TD Snap with a recent update. And reason for that is we essentially wanted to not highlight any individual page set, but more of TD Snap as a program, how it's editable and how you can change different buttons and pages within that program. And we wanted to be able to provide different page sets that are available within that program. A good example of that is now Snap Pod for pod users is now available. So you're able to use the editability within TD Snap and so all of those familiar edit controls and be able to have access to pod page sets within TD Snap. There's also an available text user, as well as a page set that's built for more of an adult. It's an aphasia-based page set, but that's available as well. I want to very briefly go over environmental control units within TD Snap. I'm probably only going to spend just a few minutes on this, but mainly why I wanted to bring this up is we talk about engagement and getting students and getting eye gaze users buy-in. And I will tell you from clinical experience, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing a student or a new eye gaze user interact with something on a screen and then it cause something to change around them. It's really a complete eye-opening experience for kiddos, as well as I think for a lot of support staff that get to see that. So within TD Snap, I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share my primary screen here and pull up TD Snap for you all. So within the TD Snap program, this is probably going to look familiar if you've seen Snap Core First before. So it's built on social engagement and building literacy skills. If I go down here to our dashboard menu, you'll see along this bottom row different environmental control unit features. And that's everything from using remote controls and sending infrared signals, something that's built into our iSeries as well as several other devices that we manufacture is that infrared transmitter. That's also something that any Windows device you can just purchase an infrared transmitter from Amazon, plug in a USB, and then that will provide you the ability to integrate different infrared transmissions, so you can operate things like fans, things like TVs, and it's really quite rewarding if you can have a kiddo that they use eye gaze to access a button and then the device sends an infrared transmission to turn on television or to turn on a light or turn on a toy. What we've done before is there's different infrared toys that you can get online as well, and if it will work with an on-off command, you can set the remote of the infrared toy to sync and have the device learn the command. And then that way you're able to actually have the eye gaze user look at a button and then pretty soon it makes, an infrared dog toy start barking. So it can be really quite rewarding seeing that cause effect relationship with much younger eye gaze users. Now, as far as for more literate advanced users go, you'll see here that we have other smart assistants. We have speech page sets built in for Alexa and Siri within TD Snap, as well as you'll see something here called Google Assistant. So TD Snap is the first AAC application to fully embed Google Assistant within it. And you'll see here the icon guide here that there's no other smart home or smart accessory that needs to be paired with this. Any user that's utilizing TD Snap or Snap Core First in this case has the ability to sync their Google accounts to be able to operate smart home accessories that are linked within that Google account. They're able to have Google speak back to them. They can ask Google questions. This is really, really important for school districts that incorporate Google Classroom, because if you think about for like a Google speaker, smart speaker, you can actually, you'll see here something called broadcast. So you can actually have the students speak through the speakers that are integrated within the classroom to participate in instruction. We use social scripts a lot in classrooms. So it might go over the day of the week. They might go over what's going to happen next on the activity, and they can literally write out what it is, and they can fully participate in the classroom. So it's a really, it's very intuitive. You can see here with home controls, especially for like literate or advanced users, they're able to operate different lights, and honestly, any smart home signal can be sent with Google through here. And that's just I think a really important consideration when you're trying to get buy-in, as well as practical use using assistive technology to access the world around the user. So that's really all I kind of wanted to go over as far as TD Snap. I'm not going to delve too much further into that information. Just for sake of time, I'd like to be able to get to questions. Okay, so we went over environmental controls within TD Snap. We've gone over a review of eye gaze access and desktop accessibility using TD Control. We saw a short video discovering the accessible apps that are available within Communicator 5. And now what I have is a review of the supports. You already have been provided with a couple different pamphlets to explore there. I also have a one sheet that has a lot of the information that I covered that I can make available. I'm not sure if this is something that I provided, Christina, but this is something that I will provide after the fact. It just kind of goes into some different concepts for professionals. We have complimentary access to some of our programs, as well as the Tobii Dynavox Learning Hub, which is something that I invite all of you to visit if you have not been there already. It's a completely free resource. And it basically goes into individual topics in like 30-minute videos over everything that I've covered today. Everything from mounting and positioning to eye gaze access to specific programs and specific devices, as well as mounting and things like that. So I hope that you all have enjoyed this session. I know that I kind of had to have a little bit of a rush there at the end, but I just wanted to say that I'm very proud to be able to continue doing this and supporting our users and different new ways of learning. At Tobii Dynavox, we're proud to ensure that everyone has a way to communicate and participate meaningfully in their lives. So thank you all again for letting me come and share this information with you today. So at this time, I think now would be a good time for questions.
So I'll take one, or start it off, I guess. I do have one question for you. I missed the name of the pediatric version of the Windows control. Is that continuous mode?
Continuous mode, yes.
Okay.
Yep, and it's important to note that anytime that you're going to be working with a kiddo and doing like an initial like eye gaze assessment, it's always a good idea to have a keyboard. Just for really general programming, it's good to have a keyboard when you're doing an initial assessment, and also that keyboard will allow you to hit an evaluation mode via the F2 key. If you hit the F2, it actually disables the off-screen menu. So that way, a lot of times we'll have kiddos, if they can get out of something, they're going to try and find a way. So what F2 will do is it will disable that off-screen menu so that when the user looks below the screen, usually you can pull up the unpause or pause icon. It will disable that so that you can continue operating during your assessment. Hopefully that makes sense.
That does make sense, actually. Thank you. One question that came up was, I heard Communicator 5 was being discontinued years ago. Is that not true?
No, that is completely, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where this information comes from. What I could say is, at least you can hear it from me, the source, it's not been discontinued. It's actually continued to be developed for about the last 5 years. And that includes the advanced accessibility features. There's actually some newer page sets that are available within Communicator 5 too, that you're able to explore. But no, certainly it hasn't been discontinued.
Here's another one around Windows control. Do you need a separate calibration for the Windows control? There was a bit of confusion around that. Is there one for the device and then?
Okay. So when you are calibrating with with Tobii Dynavox software, it's an initial calibration and that's it. There isn't a separate calibration to be able to do. There isn't a separate calibration between like operating Windows and then operating a different program. No, it's a single calibration that's used. Now, when you initially open up Communicator 5, there is a calibration that is done, but it actually has to do with what's called region-based eye tracking. So your calibration profile in the desktop remains the same all the time. When you initially launch Communicator 5, both Communicator 5 and TD Snap use what's called region-based eye tracking, which you can certainly make note of. So region-based eye tracking works different than when you're out in the desktop, and that is any company, any program. It has to do with the architecture that's used to map out where the eyes are looking. So a good example of this is when you're in a communication page set like TD Snap, you have different buttons that are available. So what happens is that those buttons, if you're looking anywhere closer onto that button, it's going to activate that center circle with eye tracking. So it's going to increase your success when you're operating in a region-based eye tracking application. That's why using a communication app like TD Snap with eye tracking is a heck of a lot easier than using the desktop, because the desktop, you have the free ability to go wherever you want. There's no regions that you can hone in on. Hopefully that makes sense.
I think so. Then we've got one here that says, thank you. I don't have any questions, but this will be a great resource for school staff. I will look at getting TD control on our devices.
For sure. And my information was available. Well, my information should be available. That's right on your guys' site. So they'll be able to reach out. And then I believe on our resources, it also has our customer service as well as our numbers and all of that. And you folks are more than welcome to reach out to me directly with some questions following this presentation.
Oh, one completely off-topic question. Can the Surface Pros get the partner window add-on?
Well, I think that
Very popular item.
I think that you might have to talk to Microsoft about that, because the Surface Pro isn't built by Tobii Dynavox. So I think that, we're always looking for new product ideas, right? And I think that brings up a good point. Like what is the importance or significance of a partner window? And it's about that face-to-face interaction. And that's actually why it was integrated within the Tobii Dynavox I series, as well as in the US with the TD Pilot that's available there, is that we wanted to, so many times, if we think about eye gaze users, for years, the screen's out in front of them, but the person they're communicating with is here. Okay. And that's not good, because we share gestural communication, we share emotions. And for kiddos, with kiddos with Rett syndrome, when they're still taking in all of that information, the changes in gestures and the different mannerisms when we're speaking that pick up on our tone. And it's important for us to be able to have that face-to-face interaction, because that's how we learn. That's how we learn to socialize and learn to communicate. And we learn pragmatics that way, pragmatics in communication. The problem is so many times eye gaze users, the person they're communicating with is back here. Well, that doesn't do us any good. So the idea behind the partner window is by having messaging and imagery emulate from the front of the device, we can get that co-communicator out in front of the user again, so that they're able to see and we're able to interact. And it's really about that social interaction and communication pragmatics. We need to have that. And that's very, very important across the lifespan. It's important for independence. It's important also because for adult users, I bring this up, we don't always want to scream what it is we want to say. I mean, an iSeries is very loud, and we talk about this as like a feature, like, we have the loudest speakers. Well, I don't want to scream at everybody. If I'm using a device, maybe I don't want to yell. So there are social engagements and situations where maybe a more intimate conversation is needed. And it's basically like having closed captions on your dialogue, on your communication dialogue. And that's really quite an interesting concept. If you're sitting in a coffee shop or someplace that's a library, someplace that's quiet, you might want to have a more quiet conversation. And so being able to have essentially the subtitles of your speech available to the person you're communicating with, that can really create a kind of different communication experience.
I think that's perfectly said. I know for our experience, our daughter would have loved to have had that during elementary school, middle school, when she's sitting in class and wants to speak to her EA directly and not the whole class. Yeah.
It's very true. It's a very, very important point. It's something that's why, feature requests and getting these product ideas, it's very important. I don't want anybody to feel that I would be shutting down their idea by saying, can we get a partner window with a Microsoft Surface? You know what? A Microsoft Surface Pro is a consumer product. We've already done that with one consumer product. We just did that with iPad in the States. It's not yet available in Canada. We're working on it, but that's a consumer product that we've integrated into a base that gives the partner window. So it's not like it's out of the realm of possibility. It's we take those requests and we actually bring them forward. So absolutely, it's a great idea.
Yeah, Toby Dynavox has definitely been great at reinventing on a regular basis. More and more.
I want to say probably close to 90% of the requests and changes that go into our software actually are user-based, based on our own user research. And we have actually employees that are users as well. And that helps inform our decision-making as well, for sure. Great questions, everyone.
Any more questions in the chat? No, looks like that's, hang on. Thank you. This was excellent.
Well, my pleasure, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Christina, as well as the Rett Syndrome Association, the Canadian Rett Syndrome Association, and this web series for being able to host us. It was a pleasure presenting to you all today, and then definitely feel free to use those supports. Lean on your professional colleagues, and definitely shoot me an email if there's ever something that comes up. I work with some really unique positioning situations as well as with access situations, and I'm always happy to help provide whatever information that I can. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. Just a quick thank you to all the associations that have provided both funding and the efforts of putting everything together. That would be the Rett Syndrome Society of British Columbia, the Rett Syndrome Society of Alberta, Manitoba Rett Syndrome Association, Saskatchewan Rett Syndrome Association, and the Ontario Rett Syndrome Association. I don't know why I always started on that one. And I will just have you, Charles, just stop the recording for us.